For the first time in NBA history, 7 different teams have won the championship in 7 consecutive seasons. Since 2019, we've had a new champion every year. Toronto, the Lakers, Milwaukee, Golden State, Denver, and now Boston. The last back-to-back champion was the Warriors in 2017 and 2018. Since then, no one has been able to stay on top for long. So why has the league entered this era of constant change and chaos? Today, I want to break it down and find out what's really driving this unprecedented parity. Let's take a quick look at the list of past champions. The logos might look a little outdated, so they could be a bit hard to recognize, just a heads up. In the 1950s, it all started with the Minneapolis Lakers, who won 3 in a row. The 1960s? That was entirely the Boston Celtics era. Total dominance. The 1970s saw a wide mix of champions, no real dynasty there. Then came the 1980s, the age of Boston and LA. Celtics versus Lakers was everything. In the 1990s, of course, it was the Jordan Bulls. No one could touch them. In the 2000s, it was mostly the Lakers and the Spurs trading titles. The 2010s were all about LeBron and the Warriors, depending on the year. And now? In the 2020s, we've had a different champion every single year. Now I've marked the teams that won back-to-back championships with a red star. It's clear that the 1960s were all Boston Celtics, and the 1990s were ruled by the Jordan Bulls. Outside of those, back-to-back titles are actually pretty rare. In the 1950s, the Lakers had some dominance. The 1980s were the era of Bird and Magic, the classic Celtics versus Lakers rivalry. In the 2000s, it was Shaq and Kobe's Lakers and Duncan's Spurs taking turns. The 2010s? Definitely Curry and LeBron. Though LeBron switched teams, each of them won a title, so it's 3 different franchises, but really the same man behind them. If we compare that to the 1970s, it might seem similar at first, so many different champions. But even then, the Lakers and Celtics each won twice, so it's not exactly parity. So now, let's look at some data and see what might be driving this era of true balance. First of all, one reason we didn't see 7 different champions in a row before is probably because there were simply fewer teams back then. With fewer competitors, the chances of a repeat champion were much higher. If we look at the number of teams over time, it becomes pretty clear. In the 1950s, the number of teams actually decreased. Due to low popularity and financial struggles, many franchises folded. But then came changes that revived interest, like the introduction of the 24-second shot clock. And the rise of superstar players like Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. In 1967, a rival league called the ABA was formed. But it eventually merged with the NBA in 1976. After that, the NBA began to grow steadily in size. Since the 1950s, the number of teams has continued to rise. Naturally, winning a championship has become more difficult as the league expands. Of course, I'm not saying it was easy in the past. But in today's NBA, the sheer number of contenders makes repeat championships far harder to achieve. Now, let's talk about how the rules of the game have shaped the league over time. There have been plenty of rule changes throughout NBA history. But many of them, especially from the commissioner's side, were likely designed to balance the competition and keep the league exciting. So here, I've picked out just the ones that were meant to level the playing field. The first one goes back to 1964, when the paint area was widened from 12 feet to 16 feet. Why? Probably because at the time, the league was dominated by big men, like Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. This was the era when records were being shattered, like Chamberlain's 100-point game and 50 points per game average in a single season. Of course, there were great guards too, Bob Cousy, Jerry West, and others. But the impact of dominant centers was undeniable. So widening the paint was likely an attempt to reduce their physical advantage and open up the game a bit more. In 1979, the three-point line was officially introduced to the NBA. And I think, just like the paint expansion in 1964, this change was also meant to help balance the game. At the time, the league was still very much center-focused, with dominant big men like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar leading the way. And although Dr. J wasn't a traditional big man, he brought a level of athleticism and vertical dominance that was hard to match. So, by adding the three-point line, the league may have been trying to open the door for smaller players. Players who relied more on speed, skill, and shooting than height or power. Looking at it this way, I'd say these two changes, the widened paint and the three-point shot, were both key steps toward creating a more competitive and balanced league. In 1984, the NBA introduced the salary cap for the first time. While one of the goals was to ensure financial stability for all teams, the deeper purpose was competitive balance. It was a way to prevent wealthy teams from simply spending more money to collect all the top talent. By placing a limit on how much each team could spend on player salaries, the league aimed to level the playing field and make sure that success wasn't just about having the biggest checkbook. The following year, in 1985, the draft lottery system was introduced. Before that, the draft order was based entirely on the previous season's record, meaning the worst teams picked first. But this system encouraged intentional losing, or tanking, as a way to secure top prospects. So the league created a lottery to reduce that incentive. A lot of people say the real turning point was Patrick Ewing. It's not official, but some believe the system was introduced to prevent teams from tanking just to get him. And honestly, if you knew a player was going to average 20 points and 9 rebounds as a rookie, and was a skilled big man with a soft shooting touch, it would be hard not to tank. Ironically though, even with today's system, you still get situations like in 2025, where a team like the Mavericks wins the number 1 pick with just 1.8% odds. So clearly, the league has been trying to create competitive balance through rules like salary caps and the draft lottery. But there's a downside too. It's become harder for teams to keep players long-term. Back in the day, it was normal for stars to stay with one team for their whole career. These days, that's pretty rare. Stephen Curry is one of the few modern players who's done that. And it really stands out now. But is player movement actually more common now? Let's look at the data and find out. This chart shows the average number of seasons each team's starters have been with their current team. And let me just say, this data was incredibly hard to collect. Seriously, tracking all this took a ton of time. But it's worth it, because the trend is clear. Player tenure peaked in the 1980s, and it's been steadily declining ever since. So what does that mean? Why are players sticking with their teams for shorter periods now? Let's take a closer look and try to figure it out. So, I decided to overlay the player tenure chart with the number of NBA teams over time. And that actually makes sense. In the early decades, there were fewer teams. So the average tenure appears lower just because the data was more limited. But that doesn't explain everything. Even after accounting for the growth in team count, we still see a noticeable decline in player tenure starting in the 1980s. So now the question becomes, what changed? Why did players start leaving teams more often? Let's dig a little deeper. So now, let's connect this with the rule changes we talked about earlier. And, yeah, it lines up perfectly. With the salary cap and the draft lottery, player movement definitely started to increase. Of course, these aren't the only reasons. But starting in the 1980s, it clearly became harder for teams to keep their rosters intact. But here's the thing. Just because a team wins a championship doesn't mean salaries skyrocket overnight. And I doubt most players want to leave right after winning. If anything, you'd think most players would want to stay with a title-winning team, right? So maybe the question is, how often do teams actually repeat as champions? Let's take a look. Let's take a look at how championship teams perform the following season. I gathered data on every NBA champion from 1950 to 2024. And tracked what happened the year after they won it all. Did they repeat? Did they make a deep playoff run? Or did they fall off completely? Let's break it down. So here's what I found. 22 teams managed to win the championship again the very next year. That's our group of back-to-back champions. 12 teams made it all the way back to the NBA Finals, but couldn't repeat. Still impressive. Another 24 teams reached at least the second round or deeper. So overall, a good number of champions stayed competitive. But then, this surprised me. 2 teams didn't even make the playoffs the following year. Yeah, seriously. 13 teams were knocked out in the first round. And 2 of those were swept. Ouch. So what does that tell us? Roughly half of all champions remained legitimate contenders the following year. The other half, not so much. Now, when we look at the outliers, a few things become clear. The 2 teams that missed the playoffs the year after winning a title were the 1969 Boston Celtics and the 1998 Chicago Bulls. And honestly, those cases are pretty easy to explain. Both teams lost their superstars. In Boston's case, it was Bill Russell, who not only played but also coached. And in Chicago's case, of course, it was Michael Jordan's retirement. When generational talents like that leave the game, it doesn't just affect one team, it shakes the entire league. So these aren't just statistical anomalies. They show how much the presence, or absence, of a single superstar can reshape the balance of power in the NBA. The 2007 Miami Heat were swept in the first round. But that was somewhat understandable. Both Dwayne Wade and Shaq were dealing with injuries. And Pat Riley had stepped down as head coach. So it's fair to say that team just wasn't in a position to defend their title. But the 2012 Dallas Mavericks? That one's harder to figure out. Dirk Nowitzki, Jason Kidd, and Shawn Marion were all playing. They were healthy. And yet, they lost in the first round. Maybe that was the beginning of a shift. A sign that it was becoming increasingly difficult for strong teams to stay strong. And that brings us to what we've learned. Between the rise in number of teams, the introduction of rules like the salary cap and draft lottery, and the modern trend of player movement, it's clear. Maintaining dominance has never been harder in the NBA. So now the big question is, which of the 4 remaining teams will take the title this year? The conference finals are going to be intense, and I can't wait to see how it plays out. And beyond that, next season is already shaping up to be exciting too. The Mavericks are adding Cooper Flagg. And the Spurs hold the number 2 and number 14 picks, with Wembanyama coming back stronger. What about the Celtics without Tatum? And will LeBron continue his legendary career? There's so much to look forward to in the NBA. That's it for today, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.